This is ChangeMakers with Katie Gore, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
This week's ChangeMaker is Ali Solis, the managing principal at Solis Strategic Solutions and a leading advocate for housing policy at the federal level. With over 2 decades of experience, Ali has shaped national housing policies and led initiatives that address the housing affordability crisis, including the creation of the Action Campaign and the Neighborhood Stabilization Program. Ali, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
It is great to have you here, and I can't wait to talk about your journey because you have a wide, diverse range of impact, everything from advocacy to policy to private sector. So why don't you start us off and tell us from the beginning what inspired your passion for affordable housing? How did you get started?
You know, my journey wasn't very linear. I started in the private sector, working on a number of non-housing related issues, and met actually the CFO of what became my first sort of career, my first job in the housing industry at a quasi-public agency called then Neighborhood Reinvestment Corporation, and that, you know, we met, interestingly enough, at a boot camp class, at an exercise class. And anyway, it's one of those opportunities that came to me, kind of fell in my lap. But I had always had a strong passion for communities and working with small businesses. I had sold insurance, actually, earlier in my career to small business mom and pop owners in the Adams-Morgan area of Washington, D.C. And that was sort of healthcare and disability plans. So I learned that there was this entire housing and community development sector that was serving, in that case, low-income Latina families, and that's, you know, sort of, I was interested in that work, but never thought about it as a career. So anyway, that was my first entryway was meeting Roy on a jogging trail and him telling me that they were looking for somebody to lead their legislative affairs department.
When you first got started, could you have ever imagined where this would take you and the impact that you would have, or did you just kind of have a moment of enlightenment to say, aha, I see where this is going? Which path were you on?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. It's really one of the most cherishing, you know, aspects of my career working in this industry has been the people, right? And the people that I've met along the way. And when you are working in community development and working within communities, the impact that you have, or at least that I had, was really fueled by meeting people who not only were struggling with, you know, housing affordability and many other economic challenges, but then also seeing what the work that, you know, many of us that work in this field do every day, you know, the changes that can happen, the impact in people's lives. And that really has fueled my desire. You know, at the heart of hearts, I'm a sort of problem solver. I like to, you know, think of myself as someone that is a collaborator and a problem solver. And, you know, in many of these cases, the solutions were sort of laid out, but these communities and these families didn't have a voice. And so my job was to figure out how to bring to light some of the challenges, the inequities that we were facing, and develop some public-private partnership models that could be scaled and solved. So no, I didn't have a path, but when I think back about the most rewarding aspects of this career and the work that I do every day, it's always fueled by a story, by a person who touched my life, and that's what makes this job and this work so fulfilling.
Tell us about the mission and some of the goals of what you're doing now with Solis Strategic Solutions. How is the systemic change, or how is your platform? What are you wanting to accomplish, and what are you doing there?
Well, thanks for asking that. You know, it's a mouthful, actually, but so we call ourselves S3 Advisory Services, but the work that we do is, again, really fueled by the needs of our clients. And I have the, you know, distinct honor of representing a number of, really, if you think about all of the ecosystem that makes up the housing and community development finance system, my clients are represented there. So whether you are a nonprofit developer of affordable housing, or an investor who is, investing in affordable housing, or a CDFI, a community development financial institution that is providing capital that otherwise wouldn't be available to support housing development and expansion of community development facilities. I have the great pleasure of working with a variety of clients that really represent the multifaceted ecosystem that is the housing and community development finance system that underscores all the work we do. And so, that's that part, I think, has really fueled my interest in being able to attack what I see as a critical national crisis, that is the lack of sufficient affordable housing supply in our country, and get to work with some of the leading all-stars in this space, and call them clients and friends.
How do you help them navigate a legislative environment that is changing every 2.75 or 3 years? What is the way that you try to engage your clients with that changing environment? It's part of our structure, but we seem to have a lot of support in the recognition that we now need affordable housing. So that didn't used to be the case. So walk us through how you're supporting clients in that domain.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting time that we're in for sure. But, the only thing that we can count on is change, right? We live in a changing world. And you're right. When I think about starting this journey over 30 years ago, most of my job was in educating key policymakers about the need to really make the national, or put the national housing crisis, which has longstanding been an issue for our country, but really get the national attention it really needed. And actually, before launching the advisory services practice, I led a national public awareness campaign on renters' needs, and got to see firsthand, the challenges that we were facing, both from consumers not understanding the complex nature of the housing crisis, as well as policymakers at all levels of government. But you're right, today, I'm not sure whether this is a good thing, but the challenges have become so stark and so clear that we no longer have to spend as much time educating, folks that we have a problem. Now people are aware that we have a problem. For most of us nerdy housing folks, I was jumping out of my seat. I'll just talk about myself, to see housing being talked about on national stages, and, to hear it be prime and center, not just of the presidential debates, but also of the vice president's debates that we saw. And so, indeed, we are in a unique time in that people are starting to see this issue. And, for years, local government, local mayors and county officials who are generally on the front lines of these things have, been finding solutions and really raising their voices. And now we're starting to see the need to do that much more stringently at the federal level as well. And so I'm thrilled to see that. I think the ways that we help support our clients, at the end of the day, most housing and real estate, as politics, are all very hyperlocal. And so it is both identifying solutions and best practices that are happening in communities that are on the front lines of these issues, and then finding ways to create those models that can be really scaled, and then bringing them to Washington to educate federal policy leaders as partners in how we sort of attack this problem at a national level and at the scale that is necessary to solve the problem. So we tend to be the sort of eyes and ears for most of my clients that are usually not, physically here in Washington, D.C., which is where I spend most of my time. But our job is to really bring in those stories of those families that I first talked about at the beginning of our chat here. And the other thing we really try to do is get people out of Washington. It is impossible to understand the complexities of the housing crisis if you're sitting behind a desk in DC. We got to get out to these communities, because while the national housing crisis is impacting, rural communities, small towns, large urban cities, the solutions are different, because communities are different and their needs are different. And so that's another thing we try to do, which is to, support local tours and educational events and town halls and those kinds of convenings where people can go back to their districts, to their states, and learn directly from those folks that are solving the problem, and understand the role that they can be playing in supporting some of those solutions.
You mentioned stories. Can you tell us a success story from your work at S3 that really illustrates the impact here? I love to see a ribbon cutting. But there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears behind people showing up for that ribbon cutting, which I'm sure at one point they weren't even sure if they were going to get to that shovel moment or that ribbon. But do you have something that's a success story, even from, maybe a personal impact or a community win that you can share with us?
Yeah, so many. I mean, but I'll think about something that's sort of recent in the last 2 years, and work that I really hadn't much experience in. One of the things that's wonderful about getting the chance to work with a variety of clients is I get to learn about issues, and I see myself as a lifelong learner. And one of those issues has been the challenges with manufactured housing in communities. What some coined, we used to call them sort of trailer parks, and what they are for working families across this country is an ability to have affordable home ownership and long-term, housing needs. And for decades and decades, most of these communities have been disinvested in, or not really have sort of fallen between not quite what we would think about as home ownership, but also not traditional multifamily apartments. And so I have the opportunity to work with a group of, it's a national CDFI that provides financing for residents that live in manufactured housing communities across the country. And they were facing just huge amounts of failing infrastructure, major safety and wellness issues and challenges. And so we set out on a campaign to really educate federal policymakers about the needs there. This was when the infrastructure legislation was being formalized in Congress, and when it was becoming clear that housing was not likely to receive any funding from that major bill. And so we went back to sort of simple tax, which is just we launched a campaign with a number of these manufactured housing communities about just educating their members of Congress about their challenges, and took folks out. We had a community in Maine in particular that comes to mind, where Senator Collins is from, and she's a leading Republican member on the Appropriations Committee, who cares deeply about housing-related issues. And in this one particular community of homeowners, they had such a failing sewage system that they were having to truck out the sewage in a privately owned truck. Yeah, and this is, I'll try to keep it without any visuals, but you can just imagine what that must be like to not know that you have safe sewage systems in the community that you're living in. And so we went and did a tour of that community, and there's significant health and safety risks, not only of those homeowners, but should one of those systems that were sort of glued together with some band-aids here fail, they were also backing up against one of their major natural waterways. And so it potentially had a sort of much bigger significant risk to the larger community. And so we worked with amazing leaders like Senator Collins and Senator Murray and others who were on the Appropriations Committee, led by a congressman from North Carolina, who is hence retired, Congressman Price, to create a new program, which actually was named after the former Congressman Price. But it is a new program that's been stood up at HUD, $250 million program to help support the infrastructure, the sustainability, and the preservation of these communities, which are home to thousands and thousands of homeowners across the country. And so actually the first round of funding is due out any day. Hopefully by the time this great podcast airs, we'll have gotten a news alert, and maybe we'll have one of those ribbon cuttings that you referenced. But that was just an incredible experience. We did a sort of 5-day, marathon tour, taking members of Congress and their staff out to the communities, these resident-owned communities. And so in addition to sort of getting funding to deal with the infrastructure, what's really unique about this model is that Rock USA, which is my client, was able to help these residents learn how to become a co-op and acquire their community and their land, because the way this real estate differs from traditional real estate is that the homeowner owns their home, their trailer, but the land underneath that is owned by investors. And so what they've been able to do is gather capital and help those homeowners actually own both the land and that allows them to have a lot more control over their futures, the futures of their community. And it's a really great story with just some amazing, and my gosh, you want to talk about the best lobbyist in town that I've ever worked for. It's working with, a 76-year-old retired school teacher who's adamant about why they, need infrastructure improvements to their communities. And they're some of the easiest champions to bring up to Capitol Hill because they don't really understand politics and they don't really care about that. They just want some resources to preserve their homes and their communities. And so that's just one of many examples. I could go down the line to talk about the impact of the stories and the families that I've had the chance to meet doing this work.
The mere fact that we're talking about manufactured housing as being one of the solutions to help close this affordability gap is a significant moment, and it's a symbol that we have progressed in our thoughts and our policy, but we're definitely not there yet. I had a guest on a previous podcast, Stacey Epperson, and she's on HUD's Manufactured Housing Council, which is amazing because, the fact that even HUD is now saying, hey, we have to have a council on this and bring this into the toolkit, if you will, of solving the housing crisis. But something that I learned from manufactured housing is that it's now being produced, of course, with higher quality, but faster, Energy Star. It has sustainability components and, of course, the affordability, but there's also density wins on land use. So we're talking about a housing product that has multiple wins, not just affordability. And I like that you are bringing us an example here about up in Maine, because now you also see this infrastructure component and you're solving multiple things with manufactured housing.
That's right. It's been a great journey just to understand this and to connect the dots, to help HUD, for example. You mentioned HUD. They've been a tremendous partner. And we're, the next big hurdle is how do we get financing? Because most of the financing is for these manufactured homes is non-traditional financing. So, you and I could go out and get a mortgage, a 30-year mortgage for our home. But just because these particular homes are built in a manufacturing site and not stick-built, for example, they are not considered real estate in the same way that a traditional stick-built home might be, and therefore the financing that's available to these homeowners is it's like a car loan basically. They call it chattel financing, and so that's the next big effort we're trying to tackle, and we're working with the GSEs and our partners at HUD and FHA to see how we can sort of level the playing field for manufactured housing and try to create, new products that mirror what everybody else has, right, in terms of the ability to have an affordable mortgage product as well. So yes, it's there. And your point about, sustainability and challenges, one of the major issues we see, we see it every day, right, with natural disasters and bigger problems. These no longer coastal market issues. I live in a coastal community myself. And so, those things have been front and center for a long time, but now those issues are hitting places like Asheville, North Carolina. And so the sustainability of the housing is something that's really important to the work that we're doing. And I think there are ways to solve for multiple issues at once. You mentioned infrastructure, housing, transportation, how we can be a connector for these issues that are interrelated. And frankly, the smarter we get about this stuff, the better use of limited public dollars. We can be better at leveraging things if we know how they connect and learn to be more efficient and effective at how we use these programs.
Well, changing up how the financing happens is one thing. The regulations are changing, the acceptance is changing. So it's just a mindset and a progression, isn't it?
That's correct.
Let's talk about the action campaign. I briefly mentioned it in your intro, but I'm so curious. I want to hear what you're doing with that And what do you see the future of maybe even low-income housing tax credit? Let's just open it up because there's a lot there. But first, tell us about your involvement in that campaign.
So the action campaigns, my goodness, I'm dating myself here, but it has been a broad-based coalition of supporters of the low-income housing tax credit that you mentioned, Katie, and the housing credit, as we try to refer to it, because it's a mouthful. And as you know, we live in an industry that has so many acronyms, it's hard to keep track of. But the housing credit is the most efficient and effective tool that we have to date, the federal government has had to date, to build affordable apartment homes. And it's one of those moments I think about my career, about, sort of important moments that happen and lessons learned. Many of the let's sort of investors, developers, owners of low-income housing tax credit apartment units at the time were all going to members of Congress with different asks and different priorities. And I remember getting a call. I was at Enterprise Community Partners as their head of external affairs for many years. And I remember getting a call from the Hill, from the tax committee staffer saying, can you guys get your act together? We have too many. This was when major tax reform was coming up. He said, we can't have 30 different proposals coming at us at once. We need to, you need to unify as an industry. And it really was a pivotal time and sort of a call to action for those of us that were really working in the housing credit industry at the time, to come up and to do just that, to develop a place where we could craft shared policies and, we might not agree on every single one as a broad-based coalition, but we would at least be presenting with a unified voice our recommendations to Congress. And that really was the start of the coalition. And it was led at the time by Enterprise, where I was, and the then head of the National Council of State Housing Finance Agencies. But really, it represented, and still does today, national, local, and regional organizations across the country that are working on the preservation and the expansion of the housing credit. And speaking of, programs that have longstanding bipartisan support, the housing credit is definitely, I would say, top of the list of that in terms of its, effectiveness. And we're hoping finally with next year's major tax legislation, we'll finally see passage of long-standing and long-supported legislation on the expansion of the housing credit.
And it's interesting because that's not just a housing policy, that's an economic policy. And sometimes we lose sight of what this really can do as far as its effectiveness.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, when you think about the job creations and the economic impact, and, for years, economists have talked about how housing can really get us, the economy back in place. And we've seen that happen. And so, we agree and fully support and think this is certainly one way to do that. The expansion of the housing credit isn't the only thing that we need, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. And here's an example where you kind of scratch your head, because we have had, I dare anybody to look at other legislation that has gotten such strong bipartisan support, Congress after Congress, administration after administration. So this isn't just, a program that's been supported by a particular party. It really, at its, since its creation, has really had strong bipartisan support. We just need to get it done. So I'm hopeful to do that. We're certainly hopeful to see that happen. It would be great to see that happen during the lame duck, but likely we won't be seeing major tax reform until next year.
It yields results, and so that's something that everybody can get behind.
Yes, absolutely.
I want to switch it up here. I want to talk about you for a minute. You're so interested in the fact that you're the only person I've talked to that has actually appeared on the Steve Harvey show and major platforms like Forbes. Let's talk about what you said and what that experience was like. Take either one of those, either the op-eds that you've done or your appearance.
Well, my least favorite subject actually is to talk about me. So I'll talk about what was really meaningful about this. First of all, Steve Harvey is a freaking riot. If you haven't seen his many, comedy moments, being on his live show was a treat, one that I won't forget. But I was really there to represent. We had started a campaign working with artists from around the country. This was when I was leading Make Room, which was this national public awareness campaign, and it was, at the time they were doing Home for the Holidays and trying to feature families that were struggling and kind of create partnerships. So we were able to partner with a developer in Chicago that helped a mom and her four little children be able to afford an apartment for a year. And that was, delivering the keys and, talking about why public-private partnerships are so essential. So the thing that was so exciting about being on that show was that we were able to really get national awareness and attention to the issue. And to me, when I think about those, moments that have been sort of the things that you put on your resume or that you see at the bottom of a bio, what's meaningful to me was seeing this, the smile on those little kids' faces. Like, I think it was 5 or 6 kids under the age of 6, right? To have them sit on Steve Harvey's lap while he talked about, how excited they were to have their own room for the first time in their entire lives. They weren't all going to have to sleep in the same bed. And those touching moments are really what inspires me and gives me purpose and hope. So that was a really fun day, and one that I won't forget. But really, again, the purpose was those kinds of stories, and I wish we would have more of those national celebrities using their bully pulpit, their platforms to talk about the impact that homes can have on people's lives. And so, I think we've got a lot of champions that have been stepping up, whether it's through this election cycle or other ways to use those voices. And by the way, many of them have experienced housing instability. And so part of what we tried to do at Make Room was to create partnerships with celebrities and artists and others who, had real life experience in dealing with housing instability and use their platforms to help raise awareness around the issue with others. So those were really exciting, fun times for sure.
What an honor to be able to elevate the voices of people who are struggling with rent and struggling with housing instability. And you make a great point about storytelling, because it's such a way to be able to change the perception of who needs housing. Why do they need it? Well, let's set that aside and let's figure out how to solve that. And what a great job of bringing some public awareness to this.
Thank you.
Do people ask you about the Steve Harvey show still today, or was that just a moment? Do people come up to you and still talk about that?
I mean, it's funny, it's like, my girlfriends that keep it real will say to me, "Why did you wear that shirt?" Or, last show. But sadly, we live in, a period of sound bites. So I'm not sure it's probably as memorable to me as it was to me to many others. But yeah, the good news about me is I have a tribe of people that keep me humble. So, they wanted to talk about, my wardrobe choices.
Well, keeping on the theme of talking about you, when you were at Make Room, you just mentioned this earlier. What was your takeaway? Like, just personally, professionally, reflect on your time there.
Wow, we were a startup organization, really supported initially through the work of Enterprise Community Partners and many others, foundations and donors who saw the need to raise the issue of renters in this country and the affordability crisis we were facing. And there hadn't really been a playbook for this. Lots of other successful local campaigns, but there really hadn't been one that with a vision that we had, which was to really bring national attention and to do a part of the storytelling. We benefited from some just fantastic volunteers and others that had really spurred the online advocacy movement. There had been some other campaigns that had really been successful around hunger in this country. And so we tried to really learn sort of what worked and partner with others around that. But the journey, we ultimately, worked to create a platform where real people, consumers could sort of share their stories and learn how to use their voice to advocate for local and federal legislation. So it ultimately was a digital platform. But the process in getting folks to engage with our platform was all about partnerships. And, we just were so, just all the stars aligned, frankly, in terms of getting people who were willing to share their time and their resources. We partnered with some, I mentioned some musicians along the way, people like Miguel and Carly Rae Jepsen and, sort of famous singers and other artists who had experienced housing instability. We did concerts for families in their living rooms. We did living room concerts, and then we aired them locally and involved local policymakers. So there was a lot of activations that were super fun, right? And by the way, that's one of the lessons learned, working for something you're passionate about and caring about, in order to do the work we do, you got to have some fun. You got to, find ways because it's tough, right? Not every day is a good one, and sometimes policy wins and changes can take decades. And so that's one of the lessons and the takeaways I learned is having fun, and we were able to really do that and bring some real awareness and attention raising through national press and media attention. The other thing we did was realize, the power of the media. We did journalism study tours where we took journalists all around the country with us to understand when they were reporting on the latest joint Harvard Center on Housing report, that these, what was behind these numbers. So this is where the storytelling really comes back into play as well. We, help them understand the complexities of doing mixed income, affordable housing development and how the alphabet soup of all the housing related programs work and why public-private partnerships are so essential to ensuring that we can really leverage public dollars. And so it was really a combination of these, artists and influencers that came together with some, education of journalists who had their own ability to really influence how people and policymakers in particular, because that was our audience, really thought about this issue. And to get better educated on solutions on the ground, that this is a problem that is solvable, that we didn't have to wait for the next best, pot of funding that was going to come or legislation. We needed all of those things, but what we needed most was for people to care and to make this a national housing priority like we're finally seeing in this election. And so that's some of the things that I remember most fondly of that work. And ultimately, we helped use the power of our online platform to get behind specific pieces of legislation in different states and communities. And it was a great, great experience. I'm really proud of the work we were able to do in a few short years.
So we talked about your early ramps and this last role. So let's now switch to future vision casting. If you could give some advice to emerging leaders or other advocates, maybe especially those who are underrepresented, what would you start to lay out as a path to people who really want to make an impact? You've kind of been there and done that and are still doing that. What would you say to specific groups of people?
Yeah, well, Katie, what I'm hearing you say is that I'm old, right?
When somebody asked me the other day about legacy, I went, wait a minute, are we at that point in the conversation?
When I first started my career, I was in Women in Housing and Finance. I remember George Knight, who was the executive director at Neighborhood Reinvestment at the time, said, if you want to go learn from, smart people that represent the entire sort of housing and finance systems, go be part of this professional organization of women. Well, we're now women and men at WHF. But I remember going to some of those very first meetings and being, this young person. I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and being so intimidated by these powerful women and also sort of starstruck but they gave me hope and vision that, working together, and that there was a a group that of other women, frankly, in the housing finance system, because there were many of us at that time. That's certainly changing, not just women, but people of color, really as, change makers. That's the topic of this fabulous podcast, which is what I love. They gave me hope that every one of us could be a change maker. And, they taught me the importance of, not waiting for a mentor, but asking somebody, who you really admire to help support you. And I did that early on in my career, and I try to do that now for others. And so when I think about, the future, I read actually Friday night, my good friend Stockton Williams, who's the head of the National Council of State Housing Finance Agencies, in his, weekly address to his members, wrote a letter to the future president. And it said, "Dear blank," and it was dated, next year, January 2026, so a year from January. And it basically was a thank you letter for all of the things that the president and the administration had done in addressing the housing crisis. And it really was thought provoking. I was thinking about it. I like things that sort of make me think, right? And that was one that made me think. And so when I think about the future of where we're going, and I now go back to events at WHF and see all of these young lawyers. You don't have to be an advocate or a government affairs person to have a role. The people that are, in accounting departments within the housing finance system or communications departments, all of us have a role that we are playing to help address this crisis. And I encourage, I'm currently the president of the National Housing Conference at NHC. We're a big, umbrella organization that represents all of the, organizations that touch housing, whether you're, the National Association of Home Builders or the National Alliance to End Homelessness are all members of our groups. And one of the things that we've been really encouraging is, the establishment of committees. So it's not just the C-suite or the senior executive folks from your organizations getting involved in these associations. We need new, young, not just the new young blood, which is what I say, but like sort of the innovation of the next generation of leaders to be getting engaged now, and bringing their talents, whatever they are. If you're a communications person, if you are someone that understands finance and accounting, the complexities of the work that we have to do on the ground, actually the deals and how they get put together. We need those kind of folks engaging with associations and advocates and others as well. And so to me, it's like, if you're someone who's working in this industry and you're not quite sure, where you can have impact, get involved in a local community. I volunteer. I serve on local boards wherever I am, currently involved in I live on the Eastern Shore. And so we've got a fabulous local shelter here that is helping people transition from homelessness into permanent supportive housing. And so to me, when I need to fill my cup, that's what I do. I go, volunteer with the Talbot team in Easton, Maryland. But, wherever your community is, there's ways to get involved locally and then to use your voice and your platform for the future. And I think we've already seen some of the innovation that's happening with technology or the way that we're building things. We talked about manufactured housing. I think, bringing that kind of ingenuity. And I just was at an investor conference sponsored by one of my clients, Pretium, and they're really innovating around real estate. But, they have been for years, but they're also trying to think about their impact in communities. And they are in the process of creating a fund where they're going to, investing in single family homes to provide more options for families that may not be interested in home ownership or maybe on a different path, or may ultimately want to become homeowners, but want to live in a community of opportunity. So, every one of us can play our role in helping to address the housing challenges that we face, because, we need homes that are going to meet people at every stage of their life, whether they are aging parents like my own who are living in a 5-bedroom house that they don't need to be living in, but, can't afford to move anywhere else. Or, a 27-year-old like my daughter living in San Francisco, the last thing on her mind is home ownership, but she wants to live in a, affordable community. And so how are we ensuring that we have a home, regardless of where you are on your journey, your individual journey, that is affordable, attainable and available to meet people along that pathway. And to me, I think there's, a lot of really great innovation that's happening within communities. And we need to be tapping into our networks and inviting others in. If you're in the healthcare world, you should care about housing because the two are so interrelated. If you care about transportation, or climate, let's think about ways to make our homes more sustainable. If you're someone that cares about energy, we have all of these resources that are now, through some of the major legislation from last year coming to be. Let's make sure that those projects, we are doing them in the most effective and thoughtful way. And then, raising some of those best practices up. We need to be better storytellers about the impacts we're having in communities. And we're really good about talking, widgets and counting units, but we need to be better at, counting impact and really being able to lift up the work that we're doing through some different lenses. So that's what excites me about the future generation of our leaders. I think there's lots of opportunities for folks to get engaged. And I'm hoping that, through my small platforms, like the work that I'm doing on the National Housing Conference and the work that I do in local communities are, inspiring people to get involved, because it really does require all of us to be engaging and bringing our talents, whatever they are, to supporting causes that we care about. And for me, it's, housing's my jam. My friends always make fun of me, but it's, I think it's essential, and we've got the data to prove it. So I'm hopeful about the future generation of folks that are coming into this space. And I'm hoping I can be around long enough to see all of the innovation and the things that are yet to come. I'd love to be able to write my own letter, or look back in 2026 about the impact that this next administration and Congress was able to make by working together and putting politics aside for once. I'm hopeful today. I'm choosing to be hopeful and excited about the future.
I asked the question because it's such an interesting time for people to be coming into this industry. When we were all in the industry, we were still doing green bar ledgers and there was no Google, things like that. But, they have the chance to pair this technology. They have the chance to have the commitment to sustainability and all of these things. Like, we've really progressed. We're not there yet, but they're coming into such a platform that can go so much farther. So there is an encouragement and, like you said, a hopefulness that we can make up for lost ground, can't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to need it. I mean, we have a gap of, millions of units of homes that are needed to meet our current needs. And those will only grow if we keep doing things the same way that we have. And so I challenge all of us to think differently, to push ourselves to think outside the box a little bit, to be open to new ideas and new approaches. Yeah, and to be willing to learn, whether that's from other countries that are doing things differently or other communities, and testing new pilots. One of the things that I really love about the work that I do is that we get to sort of test out ideas on the ground. It's like an incubation lab across the country with my clients. And, sometimes things don't work. That's okay. We have to be okay with failure to some degree, because we're learning, and hopefully, it's like the cure to cancer, right? We keep on the pathway, and, we may not cure all cancers, but we are, getting better and healthier and living longer because of the investments we've been able to make in medical research. We need the same kind of thing in housing innovation.
And we've handed this next team and this next generation a housing gap. So we're still in it to help solve it, but they're going to bring a lot to the table to help us get to where we need to get to solve this gap. I can definitely tell why you have been so influential in your career, whether it was coming up with the dollars for the neighborhood stabilization or even some of the other efforts. You've got a great passion, and you've left us with some really good marching orders on what we need to do next. Is there anything we missed before we close out? I know we've covered a lot, but anything else you want to highlight for us?
No, I think it's great that you're doing this. So thank you for your leadership in, raising awareness about the important things. And, I know I stand with some of the other change makers you've had here, that we are only as powerful as the people we serve and the communities that we impact. And so the more of your colleagues and others that can, use their platforms like you're doing to lift up some of the really exciting work that's happening, and the people that are challenging the status quo. So I'm excited to be among some of those folks, and I hope that we can continue this conversation, Katie, as maybe we can set this up a year from now and see how we've done. Bring a little panel together. I'd love that.
Oh, that'd be great. We can look at our metrics and reevaluate our scorecard and then our marching orders, couldn't we?
Absolutely.
Again, I've been talking with Ali Solis, the managing principal of Solis Strategic Solutions. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Katie.
Thanks for listening to ChangeMakers with Katie Gore. To find out more about Katie, go to quadel.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.